Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we got another great episode of Kentucky History today for you. I'm joined with Tommy Hines. He's the Executive Director of the South Union Shaker Village. How you doing, Mr. Hines?
Doing great today.
Well,
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming on. Now, we're not going to talk about South Union today. We're actually going to talk about Butler County, which is where you reside and are from, correct?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Well, and before we get started, though, I do want to always ask, like the guests, tell us your Kentucky connection, which I kind of already alluded to that. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in Butler County, actually Bowling Green, but we lived in Butler County in the first 6 years of my life. And then my dad's graduate school was in LSU. So we moved to Baton Rouge when I was pretty young. And then his job was with the Game and what they used to call the Game and Freshwater Fish Commission, Game and Fish. And so his job moved us all around in my growing up years, from LSU to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to East Tennessee, to Oklahoma, and then back to Florida, where I finished high school. After high school, I kind of wanted to come back to Kentucky. I had grandparents still living up here, and a lot of extended family, and had really never gotten the chance to be around them a tremendous amount, just for holidays and things. So I decided I'd come back up here and go to Western Kentucky University, which I did. And my parents had gone there for undergraduate. My grandparents had gone there. So I thought, well, it'd be a good place to be. So the rest is history. I finished my undergraduate and graduate degrees there at Western, and stayed in Kentucky.
Wow. Well, so you're a well-traveled Kentuckian.
Yeah, I guess, at least for about the first 10, 15 years of my life.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad that you made it back to Kentucky. Like they say, if you're from Kentucky, you got one foot where you're at, and the other one's pointed back home. So
yes, that's exactly right.
So when we talk about Butler County, and let's just be geographical at first. Where's Butler County located in Kentucky?
It's just kind of northwest of Warren County, not too far from the Tennessee line. Really, we're within just 45 minutes from the Tennessee line. So we consider ourselves Southern Kentucky, although in years past that part of the state has been called Western Kentucky. But I think from a cultural standpoint, uh, real Western Kentuckians over in Paducah and Murray and places like that would not see us as part of that demographic, really.
Yeah. I've talked with people in Hickman County and other places that are West Kentucky. They like to be called West Kentucky, not necessarily Western.
Yeah.
Now the county seat is Morgantown.
County seat is Morgantown. Yes.
And what other counties are around it? We got Ohio.
Ohio County, Logan County are adjacent to us. Muhlenberg County, and of course, as I said, Warren County as well.
Yeah, and population-wise,
I'm not even sure what the population is currently of Butler County. I know that Morgantown has a population of around 2,000.
Hmm.
I don't want the mayor to get upset with me if I undercut us a little bit, but I think that's about where we sit right now. It's not a big county population wise, and we are, pretty much still a rural county. We're just 20 minutes up Interstate 165 from Bowling Green, but we have maintained that rural landscape and still, small towns there in Butler County.
Hmm. I think if my information is correct, about 12,000 ish for the whole county.
That may be
Uh,
correct. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So let's start with the history of Butler County. Who would been the first people in the area?
Well, so the first, some of the first families are really some of the same people that are still around in Butler County. One name that is synonymous with early Butler County is Funkhauser, which we have no more Funkhausers in Butler County. I can guarantee you that. But the name of Morgantown almost was Funkhauser Hill. So I'm glad that we didn't end up with that. But that's sort of where we have started. We go way back. The county was formed in 1810, and Morgantown soon after that, 2 or 3 years beyond that. Um, so it's been there a long, long time, and progress was slow. We were isolated, and we can talk more about this. The Green River is what sustained us and was our avenue for everything for the longest time, for well over 100 years in our county's history. So that's one of the reasons that we were located where we were. Morgantown was in very close proximity to the Green River.
Um, a good question that I always try to ask, and this sometimes comes, with or without the county. When the county was made, was Morgantown built to be the county seat, or was it already kind of naturally kind of just building itself up?
It became the county seat within about 3 years after the county was organized. We had been part of Logan County earlier on, and there was a large part of Kentucky was Logan County
Yeah.
in the early days. But yeah, Morgantown was the choice. It was the first, probably some of the earliest settlement there. It's on a high bluff overlooking the river, so it's in a really good location as far as land is concerned, and way above the river. Unlike our other two small towns in the county, Woodbury and Rochester, which were directly on the Green River and
Mhm.
were the site of locks and dams, both of those. So they were both incredibly important in the progress of the county from an economic standpoint. Those were the places where a lot of things happened. But as I can attest to right at this very minute, those both of those towns are prone to flooding in the lower sections, and we are experiencing that, of course, right now.
Yeah, yeah, and just for context, and I try to do this usually, but this is recorded on April 7th, 2025. So we've had
Yes.
a lot of rain the past week. I saw a thing on WLEX. I think it put out the typical rainfall for April, and Lexington had already. I mean, they're already almost past the record, and it's only April 7th. So
Yeah.
it is a lot of rain. Um,
Yeah, the one that they always look at as a litmus test for high water was 1937. And that was the most disastrous flood that we've had in modern history, anyway. And I think we are about the fifth lower than that in the scale as far as water levels at the crest of where we are right now. So that's pretty darn close to being a record.
yeah, yeah. Um, so during this early time of or not Morgan, yeah, Morgantown and Butler, what was the main um, occupation? What was driving the um, economy and so forth? I'm going to assume farming, but go ahead.
Yeah, almost exclusively farming at the beginning, and then as we say, as the river develops, there are a lot of occupations that are connected with the river traffic. Whether you're working on the boat or on boats, or at the wharfs or the landings, there was a lot of economy associated with the river as well. But as Morgantown grew, as all little towns do, you start to have stores in town and storekeepers all along around the square that boosted the economy in a big way too. And again, every one of those stores were dependent upon river traffic to bring
Mhm.
goods and services to them. But yeah, farming was always, for the longest time, what drove Butler County's economy. I will say too that from an early standpoint, even in the early 19th century, coal mining. There was coal mining there that really became peaked in the late 19th century and even grew up into the mid 20th century. No longer a viable economic force today, but it certainly was for a long time.
Mhm. Now, the big question, as always, is Civil War. How was the Civil War in Butler County?
We were divided, but because we're in Kentucky, and there were Southern sympathizers, there were Northern sympathizers as well. So Butler County contributed a lot of men to the war effort. We didn't see any significant battles. There were skirmishes at Woodbury, and there was a bit of one in Morgantown, but nothing that made the history books in a big way. But it did affect the county. There was a Union soldier named Granville Allen that was one of the first, if not the first, Kentuckian that was killed, and there's a plaque in town that attests to that. And then we had a Confederate spy that shares my name, Thomas Hines, that was born in Woodbury and had family there for many years, and became well known with, like a lot of people that rode with John Hunt Morgan.
Mhm,
So we had other notable uh, Civil War characters there too. So some great amount of history, but no significant battles.
mhm. Big question, did the courthouse burn during the Civil
Um,
War or at all?
no, the courthouse did burn at one point, but it was rebuilt. It didn't burn all the way down. It was just damaged. There are stories about it burning to the ground, but it really did not, according to public records. Our first courthouse was a log, and then soon after that, they built a brick courthouse and continued to increase its size as history um progressed, and then built a big grand courthouse in 1872 that looked like a lot of other courthouses in Kentucky. I think they were using some of the same uh,
Blueprint?
plans, so the blueprints, yes. And it was torn down in the 1990s, I believe. My dates don't always stick with me. And we have a new courthouse now in town, but it's always been on the same spot, right in the middle of the square in town.
Wow. That's pretty good though. I mean, only one courthouse burning is is impressive for Kentucky counties.
Yes, and let me set the record straight. That courthouse was torn down in the 1970s, built in the 1870s, torn down in the 1970s. Yes.
Okay. Um, yeah, a lot of Kentucky courthouses, burn have burned down, or intentionally or unintentionally. Um,
Yes.
I'm from Rockcastle County, and they've had I think 3 courthouses burn. Um, uh,
Wow.
yeah,
Yes.
and which if get those records, if you lose those, it can be a little troublesome for. Uh, genealogy and historical searches. But in Lincoln County's courthouse has not ever burned, so it is one of the
It is
few
one
that
of the few that
that still has all the records and all that stuff, which is good considering it was one of the first counties.
counts. Yes. I was at our courthouse just last week doing a little research on deeds, trying to trace a historic photograph that we have in the collection at Green River Museum. And I'm just always so pleased at how organized and how well preserved things are there. And they've continued to, submit original documents to microfilm, and some of the original documents that are there are now encapsulated in Mylar, and it's very very encouraging to see that dedication to keeping that history.
Yes, yes, very, very much important. Very important stuff to keep intact and have records of because history is kind of an important thing to keep up with, or at least I may be a
Yes,
little
it is.
biased, but I think it's very important. um, so Butler County is named after Richard Butler, General. Morgantown. Who's Morgantown named after?
Another Revolutionary War person that I really honestly don't know too much about. But yeah, that those were the days that things were being named after Revolutionary War soldiers in both our county and our county seat as well.
Yeah, and I believe Morgantown probably holds that same bit of tradition in Kentucky county names. There is a town, and then there is a county named after the same person. I think Morgan County is the same.
It's
Uh,
Morgan County.
yeah. Um, so after the Civil War, and well, we talked about the Green River. Um, After the Civil War, when does the railroad come in? Because that's always a game changer.
Well, we never had a game change. We never got railroad. There were attempts at getting railroad, and there was talk, there were plans, but it never happened. And I think the reason is that our economy was so tied to the river, and so many people's money source was tied to river traffic that they did not want to let that go. It if you look at history, it's probably a short-sighted decision, but they clearly could not have seen the end of river traffic at that point. The lock and dam systems were put in the late 1830s, and they were always maintained, and all of that whole system was kept up until the early 20th century. So um, they just did not see the end of it. So railroads never came to Butler County, which probably in the long term affected our progress.
Mhm, mhm, and that's actually a pretty unique, situation for the county because most counties had at least 1 railroad stop or, even in Rockhouse County, you had 3 3 train stops, which, would have been Rockhouse would have been a pretty small county similar to Butler County. Um, so without the railroad, I guess nothing changed. The river the river, traffic was the main driver, anything, any unusual skirmishes, feuds that, may have picked up in the late 1800s?
Not to a great extent. We don't have any kind of a Hatfield McCoy situation at all. Nothing that is significant enough to have been recorded in history. There always are family feuds, but it's probably a small situation. After the Civil War is actually when we really started to grow.
Mhm,
And you would think that without railroads that you might see a slow disintegration, but Morgantown and Butler County just kind of reached its peak in the early part of the 20th century, first peak that is. Um, and Morgantown continued to grow businesses. We have what we called a commercial club, which was an early
mhm,
um, Chamber of Commerce type thing that took place in Morgantown.
Mhm.
You see from the newspapers of the time that they are very progressive in the way that they're trying to make Morgantown grow and the way that they're marketing Morgantown to outsiders to come and build there. The coal mining was still being touted as something. The fishing on the river was always being touted as something big there in our region, and it continued on up until the 20th century.
Wow.
One thing I can tell you about that speaks so well of Morgantown. I think that in 1907, there was a concerted effort to put up a soldiers' monument in the courthouse yard, right in front of the courthouse. The thing about that monument was that it was to be a dedication to both the northern and the southern men who
Mhm.
served during the Civil War. Um, they raised $1,000. It took a long time to raise $1,000, and they did everything from taking up, pennies from school children to having pie suppers and raffling things. And they didn't get it raised as quickly as they thought, but in 1907, finally, were able to dedicate it. And there's a marvelous historic photograph of two Confederate soldiers shaking hands with two former Union
Wow.
soldiers, and they have laid their arms down on the ground in a cross like this, signifying that they have literally laid down their arms, and they are, symbolically looking toward the future with a handshake. I
Mhm.
just think that is one of the most wonderful things, images, symbolic images for Butler County because there was that effort.
Mhm.
Um, they also, and it, while I have never seen any official newspaper article or anything in print about whose name is on the statue, but honestly, not everybody's name that was a soldier um, got on there. There wouldn't have been enough room to begin with, but
Mhm.
I think people paid a little extra to get their name on. I've heard lots of oral history stories about that, so I feel like that is the case, but I've never seen anything official that says, here's what it costs to get your name on. In fact, it looks like they may have needed some extra names and some extra money, so they started making some space for some Spanish American War um, uh, veterans on there too. Um, so that's just part of the story, but the greater message is reconciliation,
Mhm.
and that statue still stands there today, and honestly looks just as good as it did in 1907.
That's good. That's good. That is very good. And all those monuments that are dedicated to the soldiers always stand out really well in a lot of communities around Kentucky. Um, with the communities you mentioned a few. So you got Morgantown, which is the county seat. And what about the is it other communities and not necessarily just towns, but communities in Butler County?
Well, but besides the two towns, Rochester and Woodbury, there were, numerous small communities, numerous post offices. I know that by the late 19th, even early 20th century, we had over 90 one-room schoolhouses.
Wow.
So there were that many communities, and honestly, you probably know that those schoolhouses had to be placed so that anybody could walk to a school. There was
Mhm.
not much transportation, so that's why there were so many. And a one-room schoolhouse is can be a small structure. There are only a handful of those still standing in the county, and some of them have been repurposed as community centers and things of that sort. But it just speaks to all the little minute communities that there were in post
Mhm.
offices, most of which are just names on a map today. Now, I will say, if you ask somebody in Butler County, where they're from, they might say, "I'm from Gilstrap," or "I'm from Leonard Oak," or "I'm from Logansport," and there are tons and tons of others that people still associate with today, but usually they're just groups of houses and
Hmm.
churches now.
Yeah. Yeah, which, that is very typical of many Kentucky counties. You have a lot of these one-room schools, and that is kind of the uh, community hub in many ways. And then as time has gone, that you get an elementary school here or there, and or a K through 8 school. And then as time has went, those schools consolidate. So school consolidation. Or what is the school? How did the school system go from one room schools to the modern time as far as in Butler County?
Well, we had ended up with pretty significant schools in Rochester and in Morgantown, and a one-room schoolhouse in Woodbury that actually grew. They put a major addition on it, but all of those elementary schools and one-room schoolhouses start to consolidate in the 1950s and early 1960s. So we ended up with Morgantown or Butler County Elementary School there in town, which is at one time in the same building with the high school.
Mhm.
Everything was in one building. But as that has grown, we now have two large elementary schools, Morgantown Elementary and North Butler Elementary, both of which are great schools. We have a middle school, a standalone middle school now, which we never did, but just one high school
Mhm.
today. We had I think three high schools in Morgantown at one time, but we also early on had what was called the Morgantown Seminary that was established about the time of the Civil War, um, which became a tuition school. And even if you went, it became a high school and eventually some elementary classes there too, what they call common school, but you had to pay to go. So I think it was 1911 that Kentucky pretty much mandated that said, every county has got to have a public school, public high school. And then our first one was built in 1911, big brick school. And lo and behold, 5 years later, 5 or 6 years later, they were showing a silent movie in the auditorium, and the projector caught on fire, and they
Oh,
were able to get everybody out, but it burned that school to the ground. The outer walls were left, but the whole inner part, which was obviously wooden, was burned. So they quickly rebuilt, and by 1920, they're back in a new building again. It looks identical to the old one because they use the same blueprint and same plan, and it looked just like it. And then it had many additions over the years, extra classrooms, and finally a second floor gymnasium of all things, where they played
wow.
basketball. And then, unfortunately, that burned. The whole thing burned in 1970. So we have progressed greatly. You hate to lose those old buildings. Me, being a
Yeah.
historic preservationist, I look at those photographs and just think, gosh, that could have been repurposed into something so interesting, and would have made such a nice historical part of Morgantown. But it's where our modern Board of Education building stands today. So it's still doing good things, but you hate to see the old buildings go.
Yeah, I would have liked to have talked to some people who were on the first floor underneath the basketball court and see
Yeah,
how they
yeah.
endured.
Yes, they had a stage, in the gymnasium. They did plays there. They had a lot of community events, but all the basketball games were there in classrooms below, which you would never do today with the fire laws that we have, to have a second floor gymnasium full of people with wooden stairs leading up. I think there was fire escape, but still, it wasn't the best of all situations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So into the say the 1900s, and you kind of mentioned the first peak of Butler County economically. Is this when did the second peak come along? Uh,
Well, let me lead us up to that just a little bit.
okay.
I will say that through the 1920s, Morgantown continued to grow and progress, as did Woodbury and Rochester. All three communities, all three towns are very viable in the 20s, and we're nearing their peak. I will say that the combination of two things changed everything in Butler County, and that was the Great Depression. That really was starting. They were starting to feel the effects in the early 1930s, and then the development of the road system, the highway system. We had dirt roads right through the middle of Morgantown in the early part of the 20th century, and then gravel roads, and then finally paved roads. So, as in so many rural communities, once transportation is available, you're not bound to your community. You're not bound necessarily to your small, your family unit or your church or whatever. You have the ability to go, and when the economy fails as well and begins to fail, in the early 1930s, so many people were leaving Morgantown, younger people, to go to Evansville, to go to Louisville, primarily those two places specifically, to find work, which they were able to do. And you're losing your younger workforce as well. So the 30s were a difficult time in Butler County, and things continued on that trajectory, same trajectory for a long time. I've heard people, old as I used to say, old timers say that even in the late 1940s and into the 1950s, things hadn't really changed that much since the early 1900s. There was some progress, and we got Warren Rural Electric, which was a godsend, but there were still a lot of people in the 1960s that didn't have indoor plumbing. Um, things just had not changed as much as they did in metropolitan areas. And I know it's that way in many, many counties in Kentucky. Butler County is certainly not unique in that. But something started to happen in the late 1950s. And it seems like Morgantown finally was inundated with a lot of very progressive minded young couples and people that wanted to see things change. Um, and it did. And we got our, things like our first fire department. You see a plethora of community organizations coming up, things that were doing really, really good things in the county. Um, there were new buildings, new housing in Morgantown. In the early 1960s, there was a rash of little ranch red brick houses being built all through Morgantown and throughout Butler County, really. That were the first time people were living in houses other than those buildings that were built in the 1920s and prior.
Wow.
Those can still be great houses. Don't get me wrong. Those are the kind of houses that I live in now and like. But, at that time period, people weren't wanting big old dark, drafty houses anymore. They were wanting houses that had, a lot of these in the early 1960s, they didn't have necessarily air conditioning. You see a lot of window units, but they had radiant heat in the ceilings. That was a big thing that you see in a lot of these houses. So you never heard your heat come on. It was just nice and warm. Beautiful hardwood floors and low ceilings, and you could keep comfortable. And everything was on one level. And I know all that sounds so silly to us today, but it was a major
Hmm.
change in the way you carried on your lifestyle at home. So we really see that happening, and it carried on in the 1960s and even through the 1970s. Morgantown continued to grow and progress in really, really in important ways.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.